Tiffany, for finally coming onto the show. This has been a long time coming. I've been speaking about you so much in this show, and now you are finally on here. Thank you
for having me. It's a delight to be here and, to put it down on a recording.
Yeah,
our conversations.
Yes, so for the listeners, I am very close with Tiffany. We have known each other for many years, and Tiffany has guided me through my pregnancy. And so we have had these conversations a lot over the last 2 years, probably.
Yeah, I guess, because, I don't know, we really got into the nitty-gritty of it once you were pregnant yourself. And, chatting about all this stuff. And as with so many things in life, there's that constant evolution of ideas, and it's so nice to have someone to bounce them off, and I get so much value from our conversations also, so I'm so excited to be doing this with you today.
So Tiffany is a midwife, so she's got a lot of fabulous knowledge for us, but today's podcast we're actually going to hear more of Tiffany's personal story and about her 2 births. So she's got 2 beautiful boys. And both of these births looked very different, as all births look very different, don't they? But I suppose your mindset around the 2 were different. You became a midwife after your first one. But we want to hear about your story, and then we might do some more podcasts in the future where we can get a bit more of your clinical knowledge. Let's start off by hearing about your first birth. What was happening during your pregnancy and around that whole time?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you first become pregnant, it's a whole thing, right? And it was no different for me. As you said, I wasn't a midwife then, I was a nurse. And so I thought I had some idea of what pregnancy and having a baby might be like. But when you're in that experience, it's a whole nother thing. And so my story really began when I got married, and I realised soon after that maybe I was pregnant.
So it was a surprise.
Yes. I mean, we shouldn't be all that surprised. We're fertile beings, right? And, but yeah, I guess just in the flurry of prepping for a wedding, somehow pregnancy happened. And so I would have always thought that I would be excited to be pregnant, although I hadn't really ever given it much consideration. You know, it wasn't necessarily in my timeline, and I hadn't been thinking about it seriously at all. And so to then get a pregnancy test and wee on a stick and see that, okay, pregnant, that was kind of surprising, shocking. And I guess then I kind of concealed the fact that I was pregnant then. I was not feeling good about that situation, and that was also shocking to me that I was in that. So I didn't tell my husband that I was pregnant until beyond 8 weeks. So I was really nervous about that bit, and then I didn't really tell anyone. And it was only when I really started raging in my pregnancy. I was so angry, and I didn't know why. My husband knew that I was pregnant, and so he was like, oh, it's probably the hormones, and that just made me angrier. And so I thought, something's not quite right here. And I started writing down all the symptoms I was having, all the things that I was feeling, and I saw that there was quite a big list of not great positive feelings. They were fairly dark. I had a time as well where I felt as though maybe it was better not to be around anymore. And so that was the point where I thought, maybe I need to go tell someone I'm pregnant. So I told my mum, and then she was going to come to a doctor's appointment with me. So I was really vulnerable, and I thought, what doctor will I go and see? Because, pregnant, go and see a doctor. That's what we know of the maternity system as it is in Australia. And so I booked in to see the doctor who I had seen since I was a child.
Your child doctor, family doctor.
Family doctor. And because, you know, I felt as though this person was the best choice for me, and I knew them. And basically I went into this appointment, I said, so I'm pregnant, but that's not why I'm here. And it was 15 weeks. I said, I need a referral to a psychologist or something.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were very well aware of what was going on mentally. So hang on, just go back a second. So you were closer to 15 weeks when you told your mum.
Oh, yeah.
And 8 weeks when you told your partner, your husband. And do you know roughly how many weeks along you would have been when you found out then?
I guess around that 6-week mark, you know, when I had started to have some nausea and all of that sort of thing. So, yeah, maybe 6 weeks. Yeah. It was a while ago. I know there was certainly a gap between finding out. I went into a public toilet at a really random place at a boulevard, a shopping centre, and I'd been into the pharmacy and I bought a pregnancy test, and I went into the toilet, and I don't know, I was shopping with mum or something. She was outside, and I was like,
oh my God. So that gives even more context
tell her
to that.
At that time. It was like,
so you're like,
later.
wow, I'm going to hold on to this and work out what's going on. Even at that first doctor's appointment, you were already still trying to ignore, no, I'm just here because of my mind.
Yeah.
So what goes on from there?
So I guess then I started seeing a beautiful psychologist, and as part of the mental health care plan at that time, there were 10 subsidised appointments with a psychologist through Medicare, and that was really great to be able to access that. And so I saw her, and gradually over time I was able to talk through a lot of stuff, and I came to understand that there were many things in my life and my situation that were contributing to the way that I was feeling. And so I worked through that stuff, and I remember one particular appointment with her where she said something along the lines of, you know, for some women, the baby's born and then all of this feeling that you're having just kind of lifts. And I was very dismissive when she said that to me. I was like, no, I don't think this is just going to lift. And but it turned out that's exactly what happened for me. So I don't know whether it was the suggestion that she had made that could be something that would happen, or whether it was the shift in hormones or what it was. But certainly that then coloured my experience of moving into parenting this baby, because I had been through something that was very dark. I was diagnosed with depression, perinatal depression, not so much anxiety, but certainly low, feeling really low. And so I guess once I got on the other side of birth, the baby bit felt really easy.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So
cool. Did they start you on any medications at all, or was it all managed through your appointments with your psychologist?
Yeah, so all just talking things through, and that was good. That was all that I sort of felt I needed, and also, with some guidance from the psychologist also. Yeah.
So how were you feeling leading up to the actual birth? Were you able to connect with your baby during pregnancy, or were you still finding that really hard because of your mental state?
Yeah, okay, so I guess baby was just growing in there, luckily, just doing their thing. And aside from my mental health, the pregnancy was going swimmingly. I mean, I was 26 and I was pretty healthy and fit, and I was working at the time on my husband's family's dairy farm, and so very, very active in that pregnancy, still in significant denial.
So leading up to the birth,
as I did at the time, there were antenatal classes available through the hospital, and so I signed up to the antenatal classes, and these classes were being run by the most beautiful midwife, and it was the first time that I started to realise that I was actually pregnant.
Yeah, you haven't spoken about this story for a very long time, or in its entirety, have you?
Yeah.
So lots of emotions. Take a big breath.
That was kind of wild, because that was then about having to face this pregnancy.
How many weeks were you at that point?
I was well into my second trimester, so beyond 26, 28 weeks, I suppose. And yeah, so that was kind of new to recognize that. And of course, my husband and I, we went along to these classes, and the content was fascinating. And I really resonated with all the things that I was hearing in the classes. And I guess it was at that time, approaching 32 weeks, I remember it was 32 weeks, I was like, what am I doing? Like, I started to feel as though I just wanted to be left to be able to birth on my terms, step into my power with birth, and really like do this birth in the way that I wanted to. And I wasn't really sure where all that was coming from. I didn't have language to really put to the feelings that I was having around where that desire, what its origins were. Like, I didn't know that birth was something that could just happen, you know, and until I went to these classes. And so that was really cool to learn about all of that. But then, yeah, what do you do with that sort of information? So I also had that whole bit of having learnt through my life that, you know, the doctors, they know what's going on. And so I really had reverence for the doctor who I was seeing each week towards the end of my pregnancy, and what he had to say. I was really listening to that, and I was like weighing everything up and trying to make decisions around what I wanted to do for my pregnancy. But the interesting part of all of that was that I began to have this story of, I'm going to have to go into this hospital and fight for the things that I want. And I thought that in my mind, and I started to say that to people who were asking me about what my plans were for my birth and that sort of thing. I was like, you know, I really want this thing and I really want that thing. And I guess towards the end of the pregnancy, with all of that chatter, all of that self-talk, I slipped into this state of like fight and flight. And I was really quite adrenaline fueled or higher levels of cortisol, and just that constant stress response towards the end of my pregnancy, which interestingly is the exact opposite of what is helpful in order for spontaneous labour to begin. And so as it was, the pregnancy continued on, and at 42 weeks pregnant, I went to an appointment with my doctor, and each week I'd been saying to the receptionists at the doctor's surgery, oh, I won't see you next week because I will have had my baby. And that didn't happen. And so I kept going to these appointments, and of course wellbeing scans are offered and continuous monitoring for baby just a couple of times a week in order to check in with Bubs. And so all of these things were happening beyond that 41 weeks. I was also having conversations about induction from around 40 weeks with my doctor, and so I'm really starting to feel a lot of fear creeping in around all of these decisions that I'm now starting to have to make, because I'm edging beyond the parameters of what is considered normal in pregnancy and birth. So that was kind of full on.
What made you feel like you were going to have to fight for your choices? Obviously, that's not an unusual thought to have, because often we do have to fight for what we want in that situation. But what were the little things that were pushing you to think that was going to be the case?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. And casting my mind back, I just can't put my finger on it. I actually can't put my finger on a whole lot, because the process of then transformation into mother, and everything begins to get a little bit blurred around all of that. And since I didn't write any of this down at the time, it's challenging to know what it was. I wonder if it was the conversations or the discussions that were happening in the antenatal classes that really sparked that curiosity around all of that. But yeah, I can't be sure what that shift was about, whether it was even deeper, whether it's that coming through that maternal lineage, that kind of thing, and that inner knowing and remembrance of what our bodies are capable of. I'm not sure.
It's a funny thing, for some people that might be the first time in their life that they ever experience that feeling of having to fight for their choices around their own bodies. Yeah. If you've never been unwell and you've gone through your whole life pretty much not really in the medical system at all, you're never really faced with that. Yeah. But as soon as you're pregnant and you step into that medical system, immediately there's outside bodies trying to control or have a say or
make suggestions.
And
have some kind of influence.
Yeah. And it's the first time that you're feeling like you actually have to
face it.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, through our life, we have been conditioned in such a way to look to authority for certain decisions that we make throughout our life. And so, it's not by accident that we're in this situation by the time we come to birthing our own babies, but it certainly makes it something to grapple with.
Yeah.
At that time.
And the thing around the induction is that those conversations start earlier than what you really probably want them to be happening. But I can also understand it from the doctor's point of view, where they're trying to prepare the woman to start thinking about those choices around what's involved with induction. Yeah. But I remember even for myself, when we hadn't even gone over the due date, that's when they first mentioned, okay, well, if things haven't happened by next week, we'll do an induction or we'll do a stretch and sweep or whatever. And you're thinking, hang on. I'm not at that point yet. I don't even want that to be on the table as an option just yet. Like, let's just see what happens here and now. So, okay, so you made it to 42 weeks, was it? And then they started saying induction, or what was happening? Where were you there?
Yeah. So induction had been spoken about since 40 weeks. So, by the time you're at 42 weeks, you've had many conversations about that. And I guess this appointment on 42 weeks was really, I don't know what I was thinking, but I came out of that appointment understanding that, okay, tomorrow, Tiffany, you're going to go into the hospital and they're going to break your waters, and then you're just going to wait for labour to begin. And I was like, cool, yeah, I can do that. I'll go to the hospital. I'll get them to do that thing that they want to do. Like, they've been talking about it for weeks. Let's do that. And so I arrived at the hospital. I'm not even sure if I took bags. Yeah, I must have taken some bags in and things, but I thought I was going to go home, like, after releasing my membranes. Okay. Not the case. That's not how they roll. No. And so I had that done, and then they said to me, okay, now you can go for a walk on the beach. That's amazing, right? So you think, oh, that's so cool. Like, this hospital, it's right near the beach. I'm going to go for a walk. The reality of walking on the beach with your membranes open or your waters open is kind of not that enjoyable, as trickling down your legs, because amniotic fluid is copious, right? And so as you're moving around, it all just comes out. So got back from this little stroll feeling rather saturated. And then they said, oh, now it's time to put in the cannula and we're going to start the synthetic oxytocin drip. And I was like, hang on, I thought I was going home.
So the syntocin is the synthetic oxytocin that they give you to try and make nice strong contractions.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so tell us about this part now. So you've realized that you're not going home.
I'm not going home.
And some more stuff's going to happen.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So I realized that rather quickly once the syn was tongue. And it started running. And of course, I now know I'm a midwife. It's gradually increased, but I was quite aware of that during my induction also, because I felt like I was at the mercy of this midwife who just kept increasing the synto and increasing the strength of these surges or these contractions that I was having. So that was a ride. Oh my goodness. I was not expecting it to be so intense, but I thought that I had prepared well. So I used some of the techniques that I had learned in the antenatal classes. I had listened to the hypnobirthing Australia scripts, and so I had been doing that during my pregnancy, and so I felt like I could have a few tools in my toolkit. I didn't really have a very good handle on breathing, but I was doing my best with the information that I had and what I knew. And so just getting through each surge. But the purpose of this is to really increase those contractions to such a state and such a rate that, you know, the baby is born after a time. And so they were coming thick and fast, you know, and all I wanted to do was go into the shower. I just was asking, please let me go into the shower. I just want to have some water, and no.
Of course, I hadn't thought of that. So you're now, because you're hooked up to the Syntocin, you're stuck on the bed. So you really don't have that freedom. It's a very different, something that I hadn't really thought of, it being quite a different process to when your body is naturally producing its own oxytocin and the surges are getting stronger and faster, and you kind of just feeling your body and going with it. Now you're like, you're to blame, nurse, midwife, you're the one who's pushing that button and you're not feeling in your body. And also you're not allowed to go into your little cave in the shower like you wanted to.
Yeah. And the other part to that as well is that with induced labour, you're not getting that same feedback of endorphins that you would get with a spontaneous labour. So the surge builds with the oxytocin, and then as you come down the peak of that oxytocin wave, you get this like rise in endorphins, and that's the hormone that makes us feel so good. We have research that tells us that endorphins are between 20 and 40 times stronger than morphine, and our body produces that on its own. So, but in an induction, you're just not getting that same feedback because the synthetic oxytocin works in a slightly different way.
Far out.
But obviously I didn't know this at the time.
No. Just on that point, I've heard of people that go into, can experience like a euphoria type of experience, and that must be that part, is it?
Yeah, totally.
Interesting. And so how long was your labour going for then?
I coped with all of my tools and used all of that stuff for maybe 8 hours of this induction. And then I they offered a vaginal examination to check my cervix and see how things were unfolding there. And I was told that I was 4 centimetres after 8 hours. And I also didn't understand that was actually really amazing. As a first-time mother, to be 4 centimetres after 8 hours of an induction, that's freaking awesome. Which
your body's been doing a lot of stuff for 8 hours,
But in that moment, I did not think that.
Yeah, you thought 4, that's 4 out of 10. I've got to get to 10.
That's exactly what I thought, yes. And so I said, it's time for the epidural. I need something. I forget about this bit. The anaesthetist, it took maybe an hour for the anaesthetist to come in, popped the epidural in, several attempts, and then left. And with an epidural, it's not, it's not always, every woman is unique and different and has a different anatomy. So the epidural can work in such a way that it varies from woman to woman. Didn't know all of this either. And so the epidural that I experienced was fully blocked mobility and movement in my legs, but I still had sensation over my abdomen. So now I wasn't able to move, but I was still having the same intensity of contractions with my labour.
That sounds horrible.
Yeah.
Oh
and it wasn't cool. So I think at that point, I mean, it's a blur, but I'm pretty sure that anaesthetists came back and attempted to do something. Whether I had it re-sighted, I'm not exactly sure. And I got some amount of coverage over my abdomen. I think it was just on one side. So then I still had full intensity on one side, but not the other. So that was kind of weird and full on also. Couldn't move on the bed. And that was really scary, to be stuck in a position essentially paralysed in your lower limbs. And so I would need people to move me on the bed. And I mean, all of this went on. And eventually, in the middle of the night, I think it was 1 o'clock in the morning, I birthed my baby vaginally, which was epic and amazing. And I was so happy that I did that. But the thing that really pushed me to make that happen, to my mind, was there was a point in that labour where I had the doctor and the midwife, and they looked at each other, and I saw them look at each other, and they'd had a look. I don't know what they were thinking, but I felt like they were looking at each other because they were thinking either forceps or cesarean or whatever, but those words never were said. But I was like, I am not doing that. This baby is going to be born this way. And so they were kind of, oh yeah, that's right, because Bub's head was still very high. So I brought baby's head barreling down through my pelvis and out, and then vomited all over the midwife.
Payback for the oxytocin.
Well, this is the third midwife by this stage, so we'd already changed shifts a bunch of times.
Just to go back with this dilation, it's not really a good indication of how long it's going to take you. So even though you're 4 centimetres, you could potentially get to 10 really quickly. Could be really long. It's different for everybody. So it's not really a good indication. It's not like you move 1 centimetre every hour or something like that.
Yeah.
Like
Women's bodies just vary so much. And by placing our fingers into a woman's cervix, we can have a little snapshot of what is happening right at that moment in terms of the baby's head, in what position it's in, and also how open the cervix is. But really, the cervix is only the lower part of the uterus. So it's not this separate bit that magically springs open like a rubber band. It's the lower segment of the uterus, and it has to be pulled up by the fundus, which is the top of the uterus. So even as a midwife now, if I am to check a cervix, I potentially can't feel part of the cervix that would need to still be pulled up and around baby's head because it's too far in to reach. And so there's even that, like that even if we are told that we're 10 centimetres, there still may be some lower segment of the uterus sort of sitting around baby's head. Maybe baby needs to find a different position to come then down through the pelvic structures. So there's just so much more than a cervix, like when we're birthing our babies, and it's a small piece of information as part of the bigger picture. But for us as women, when we're birthing, we really get quite, fixated or we think about it in the way that you described earlier of, oh my goodness, it's taken me X number of hours to get to 4 centimetres. I don't know if I can do that same number of hours to get all the way to 10 centimetres, because that's the narrative, that's the story we have around cervixes dilating and birthing babies, right?
And one of the reasons why lots of women, and myself included, put on our plan not to be checked, because that can really mess with your mental state and your mindset.
It's a really great technique, to consider whether that's information that is going to be helpful to you or whether that's going to create a change in your mindset around birthing. And so
and only you will know what it will do to you, but well,
that's right. It varies woman to woman, and some women are quite comfortable with knowing the number, and that's so fine. So
before we dive into the next part after your birth and baby has come out, looking back on that experience, do you feel like baby just wasn't ready, or there was intervention made at the wrong time, or that you trusted that you that intervention had to happen? Or have you had any thoughts around reflection on it? Or have you sort of like, well, that's happened and I'm just going to do something different next time?
I have had huge reflections on all of that. Yes, absolutely. And what I have come to is this realization, and I mean, I'm beyond 7 years since this experience, so it's given me a lot of time to think about this stuff. But I am so grateful for that experience. I really am. I wouldn't be a midwife if I hadn't have had that type of experience. I wouldn't be so passionate about birth. I wouldn't be striving to share with families ways that they can navigate their birth, feeling really empowered and as though they have agency over their bodies, if I hadn't have gone through that. And there's a really great quote by Jane Hardwick Collins, and she says that we have the births that we need to have in order to take us to the next part of our journey. And particularly in the context of parenting, you know, these types of birth experiences do then set us on a path. I stepped out of that hospital after that birth experience and I was like, well, I'm not birthing in a hospital again. And I'm going to be a midwife.
Two amazing things that have now happened. And I suppose these conversations are around, not to say that intervention shouldn't happen or that intervention's always a bad thing, but it's to say for women to empower yourself with knowledge, have your inner power and keep your voice and work through the situations that you're faced with, to have a choice around your birth so that you have the most positive birth experience that you can. And a positive birth experience doesn't mean it has to be this all natural birth that you just breathe the baby out. It can be in any form, but it means that you feel good about the choices and nobody was sort of taking advantage or intervening over top of you.
Yeah, that's right. And the evidence that is around birth trauma in particular. So firstly, with birth trauma, 1 in 3 women will describe their births as traumatic and then potentially have complications as a result of that for their mental health, all of that sort of thing. So there's that. But then we also know that the reason that women have trauma around birth is because they feel as though decisions were taken out of their hands and they were not treated with respect and dignity, and their rights were taken away from them. So that really culminates in this sense of feeling as though it was a traumatic experience, and that was certainly my experience. And although I've had a vaginal birth and it was with an epidural, and on paper it actually looks like a really successful induction, that wasn't how I experienced it. I didn't come away feeling as though that were the case. And that really led to then my reflections as such around then not wanting to birth subsequent babies in the hospital. Yeah.
We have touched now on that you were going through your birth and through your pregnancy, your mental health was not at its best. What happened as soon as the baby came out?
I had this baby and immediately after the birth, I had skin to skin and really great breastfeed. And then there were 3 more babies born in succession after my baby that morning. So I never saw the midwife again because in this small little hospital manned or womaned by only 2 midwives, there was I birthed at 1 o'clock, someone else birthed at 2 o'clock, someone else birthed at, 4 o'clock, and then there was another birth at 6 o'clock. So it was quite a busy evening for those midwives, and that was bliss. I was so happy to just, after all of that, just be left to my own devices. And I'm sure the midwife popped her head in, but I don't remember. And so then I had this baby, and I'm pretty sure I got a very, relaxed baby, which was probably the only baby that I could have. I got the baby that I needed after that experience. And so, my son breastfed and slept and did all the things that you could hope for, I suppose, and I felt pretty lucky about all of that and enjoyed the parenting part. Like, that was awesome. I thought mothering was going to be so hard for me, and it was not. So that was good.
Yeah, you've said to me a few times you will have the baby that is the most perfect design for you, and he was definitely the most perfect design for you. So after this birth, you've said that's led you to have a new belief system around birth and educating women. And over these 7 years, you have you're following a pathway, I suppose, around you're a midwife now, which you became qualified how long after having your first?
So firstly, I became a breastfeeding counsellor with the Australian Breastfeeding Association. So I really wanted to be with other women, and I saw that as a way of, finding that sisterhood and that solidarity in the breastfeeding part, because I felt that I had something to offer there. Then began my midwifery training when he was 2 years old. Worked at the hospital as a student midwife as well, and I focused all of my assignments and studies on making sense of the birth that I had, and really by unpacking what the research was saying about the things that I had chosen, and kind of retrospectively understanding how I came to those decisions, I guess. And yeah.
And heading into this second birth, what was your mindset like? I know you were very excited for this second birth.
I mean, it took a long time for me to consider becoming pregnant again. Okay. I thought I was going to have one baby. I had no intention of going through birth again, and if I did, as I said, it would be in the home. But certainly the process of becoming a midwife gave me the time and space to really consider the previous birth, and then start to toy with the idea of maybe then having another baby. So it was 5 years before we got to the point where we were willing to go through, well, I was willing to go through another pregnancy and birth. And so in preparation for all of that, we started doing all the things that would set us up for a really healthy pregnancy. So, getting off the alcohol and focusing on a really healthy diet, and eventually then having this conception that came out of all of that. I went and saw a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner for some acupuncture and some herbal stuff, and before even becoming pregnant, that felt like a really nourishing way into pregnancy for me. This second time around, I went on a stick. And then I called that midwife who had taught those antenatal classes 5 years earlier. I said, will you be my midwife?
Just for the listeners, you had a private midwife for this next one, and you got in touch with her very early on, straight away? Yes, because they are in high need. Everyone wants them. They book out very quickly.
That's right. And so I already knew that was what I was going to do. So as soon as I was pregnant, I made contact and set all of that up. I really spent a lot of time still addressing reservations and fears that I was having around birthing. In that period of my midwifery career, I was actually working with the Midwifery Group Practice, which is a continuity of midwifery care service, and I was based in Bunbury. So I had a caseload of women who I was meeting, and we were both pregnant together. And these women who I was supporting in their pregnancies and births, they were a little bit further along than me, but it's funny, I see them now, and our babies are pretty much the same age. So at the time that felt like some distance. But yeah, so I was on call during that time. So I would drive to attend births, and I got the chance to also attend home birth as part of that program as well. So all really great preparations for me personally for my own pregnancy and birthing experience that next time around. I also attended the Positive Birth program, which is offered through the WA Country Health Service, and I learnt about hypnobirthing techniques and all the different tools that come as part of that program, which all women are able to access, because I then went on to train as a practitioner and I now teach that program that I love so much in my pregnancy, you know. And yeah, so I was doing that. I went and saw a women's health physio and was able to address my pelvic floor. And I know that you've spoken to Izzy on the podcast, and she really outlined all the things that I experienced in my pregnancy as well. And that was great. I saw an osteopath and had regular treatments with that.
The osteopath, was that to align hips and things like that?
Osteo
just to see what it's like.
Just amazing, and I can't explain that, but that was such a wonderful experience to regularly see this person. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they do what they do, but it felt really good. So I also saw the traditional Chinese medicine practitioner and had acupuncture frequently as well. So I was doing all the things. I went and did pregnancy yoga. I sought out this particular pregnancy yoga teacher because I knew that she was a student midwife, and I thought, if I like her, I might ask her to be my student midwife. I did. And she was then my student midwife, so that was great as well. And then the other part I really should say about private practice midwife, because obviously that then is the support, the overarching support that I received throughout my pregnancy, and just so important and amazing. So what that involved was having appointments in my home and basically just to catch up. Well, that's what it felt like. I know that there was obviously lots going on in those appointments, but certainly it was forming that really solid connection and relationship with the midwife who was ultimately going to then attend the birth at home for me. And so
I love how you just said the midwife was going to attend the birth. We quite often use language around the doctor that would deliver the baby or the midwife that would deliver the baby. The woman delivered the baby.
The baby's not a pizza, so there's no delivering of anything. I mean, we're birthing this baby. Yeah. It's not something that we're passive in. It's something that even if we opt or for medical reasons go down the path of caesarean section, we are still birthing this baby. This is a birth that we own as women, and own is even the wrong word, but it's not really about anyone else. It's about the woman and the baby, and they should always be at the centre of the experience, and other people are there to provide that support, and whatever the woman's needs are, then allow that to, or not allow, saying all the words that we have in our language that really are quite authoritarian, but that's really not the situation in birth. It's about something that our body is doing. It's a physiological process that unfolds, and so it's not necessarily a medical event. Yes,
we think of it like that.
Yeah, and the physiology of birth really is no different to the physiology of any other functions of our body. Our heartbeat, our breathing, our digestion, all of these things we just do, right? Our body just does those things, and we don't have a doctor walking alongside us through those functions. We don't have a doctor there every time we do a poo going, push, you're doing so well. Can you imagine? Or we only seek out that medical support when we run into a dysfunction of those processes, or there is then something that's bothering us about that. That's the time we seek medical support. And so it really is no different with birth. Birth is physiological. It's another process that our body is designed to do. And if we reach a time during that process where we do need that medical support, then we can easily seek it, because we live in a time and a place where we do have access to wonderful medical care should we need it. Yeah.
So let's keep going with what you were talking about as the private midwife, because I hadn't heard of what a private midwife was until I became pregnant and you told me about it.
Mm-hmm.
And another lady that we've had on here who's a doula, Janice, she also has spoken about the private midwife and how challenging she found it to find the information. So explain to us how the private midwife works in relation to a doctor. Do you have both? Do you still go to doctor's appointments, or are they all done at the home with just the private midwife?
I would suggest that navigating the maternity system here in Australia is one of the most challenging aspects of pregnancy and birth. So certainly a private midwife provides services throughout the pregnancy and support, but there is also generally an obstetric provider that is involved as well to an extent. And this situation is one where you are required to go and see a doctor in order to get a referral to a private practice midwife.
Oh, okay.
So just like you would get a referral to any other specialist service, you would go see your GP and then you would get a referral that way. So that's how it sort of works. And then the default to that seems to be that then you have a doctor who is available then should you need it, but for the most part you would continue to then see your private midwife. Often the hospital paperwork is attended to by that private midwife as well, or there may be a situation where you might just do a one-off appointment with the hospital just to check in, because it's important to have a backup hospital in case you need to transfer if you're preparing a home birth. The other thing about private practice midwives is that they can support birth in the hospital also, and I'm pretty sure that's the case with Janice.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yep, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so being a midwife in the hospital and seeing all these different births going on in the home, in the hospital, you would have seen quite a variety of ones that were really easy. That's probably none are easy, but ones where, the baby maybe just plopped out and no intervention and no painkillers or anything like that. And then you would have seen other variations, which are maybe the more scary kind of stories that we don't necessarily hear, or maybe we do, but you've seen a variety is what I'm getting at. This can, for some people, create fear that you've seen the worst of the worst and you don't want it to happen to you, but then it can also be quite empowering for other women. How did you feel seeing all of these births leading up to yours?
Yeah, I was really quite aware of that as something that I needed to keep in check, and it's really important to not take other people's experiences on as our own, and that was a philosophy that I held fairly strong throughout my own pregnancy. Certainly we have lived experiences up until the moment that we give birth, and all of those things that have come before inform then. And so I was making conscious effort to address any fears or reservations that were coming up, but also acknowledging that birth is inherently coming with risk. So all birth comes with risk. That's a fact. And for each individual person, it's the risk that they're willing to then sit with that becomes so unique. And in that decision-making process around all types of things, it's understanding that there is risk and then what you're willing to accept as risk for yourself and your baby. So I didn't feel as though birthing in my home was a risky option for me. And that's because I feel safest in my home, and I know that from my first experience of birth, I had such a lot of adrenaline that was in my body, and I felt as though that contributed to then labour not starting spontaneously. So I knew that home was a great place for me to be. I knew that I could make use of the physiology or the hormonal physiology of childbirth in that way. Privacy, safety, and feeling a sense of not being observed, were the things that were going to encourage that flow of oxytocin. So all of those things made me feel as though home was not a risky choice for me personally. And I also was very comforted by the fact that the hospital's, 20 minutes down the road, and that feels close enough for me. I was quite okay with that. I prepared for a transfer into the hospital. I had a hospital bag. I knew that was something that was a potential possibility, and I got really clear on what it was that I wanted in all kinds of scenarios. I had a set of birth preferences for different situations, but I also spent quite a lot of time talking to all the people who were then going to be attending my birth about what it was that I wanted. And so I invited my mum to come along to this birth. Both myself and my brother were born by cesarean section, and I really wanted her to have an opportunity to witness birth. I feel lucky as a midwife to be in the presence of birthing women, and I wanted her to have that experience. So I, particularly for Mum, I wanted her to understand where I was coming from. So I guess my birth preferences for the home birth scenario were really about sharing what it was that I wanted out of those support people. So it was things like, after the baby is born, I would like for the environment to continue to be dimly lit and not no chatter and no unnecessary movements, or just really calm, and keeping all those same conditions that are so important in birth, skin to skin and all of these things, because birth is not complete until the placenta is birthed. And so I spoke to Mum about that. I also spoke to her about when they arrived to the house, that it's really also important to not come and talk to me or anything like that. I just want them to arrive into the space, a few big deep breaths, and then eventually move towards me if that feels right. So yeah, lots of little things around all of that setup that is seemingly potentially unimportant, but those are the things that are going to make the birth less risky, because the reasons that would introduce fear are alleviated to an extent.
And you can try and create some of these things in a hospital birth as well if you weren't to do a home birth. So you can say who you want to have in your room.
Yeah, totally.
And who you don't want to have in your room.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so who was at your birth?
I had my husband, came home from work, 7:30 in the evening, and I was like, we might have a baby tonight. But also I was like, probably not going to have a baby because I'm only 40 weeks and 6 days. And I was, surely this baby's not coming that early. That seems way too early. I was prepared to go be pregnant until at least 43 weeks this time, given my previous experience. So I sent him out to the shed in the early part of my labour, once I had a sense that maybe we would have a baby, because I was really taken with the idea of, after the baby's born, placenta's born, I really want to burn the cord. Of course, right? I'm not in a hospital. I want a chance to try this thing that I had heard about in the birth stories that I've been listening to. I should say that birth stories were really one of the main ways that I prepared for this birth, to be honest. I would just listen to podcasts back-to-back, birth stories all day, because I just wanted to hear what it felt like from a woman's perspective in all kinds of situations, so that I had some reference point, I guess, and some language, even more language around what I was going through myself. But yeah, so my husband, he was out in the shed building a little box to be able to then get some beeswax candles and burn the cord after the baby was born. And so he spent, a couple of hours in the shed.
Sent him off with a task. There we go.
It was great. And that gave me the space to then just cruise around the house. My older child, who was now 5 years old, he'd already gone to bed, so he was he was sleeping, and I watched some Married at First Sight, obviously.
Okay.
And I sat on my birth ball, and I was like, oh, well, let's see if we can get this happening.
Keeping moving.
Yep, and the mindlessness of something really...
Mindless. Like Married at First Sight.
Yeah. But I got really bored with that super quick, because then everything started to build, and I walked out to the shed and went and checked on the box building progress, and I'm walking around this dusty shed and I'm having a few surges, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so different to last time. There was no dusty shed. It was very clean.
Yes, clean and clinical.
Yeah, so that went on for a bit. I was looking at the stars and I was having all these endorphins, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how good this is. And I'm sending texts to all the other people that I'm going to have at my birth. So Tony, my photographer, I sent her a text. I'm like, I might have a baby, but I can still write a text, so probably not. She was like, okay, I'll get in the car. And then my student midwife, I was like, oh, I just don't think I'm going to come to yoga tomorrow night, because I think it's time to start staying home. She's like, I might not have a glass of wine.
Okay. I think I'm going to be going to a birth tonight.
Yeah. And then I didn't ring my midwife. I forgot about her.
Yes, I was going to say, where was your midwife? Where did you tell her?
I didn't. At some point I said to my husband, I was like, oh, you really do need to send her a text. At this point, it was pretty intense. There was no text writing happening. So
Mum and Dad, when did
I must have texted them at some point too.
And your dad came, didn't he?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And so at this point, before midwife has been called, I know you sent Dad off with a chore too to help with the pool, the bath?
Yeah, no, my husband was sorting out the pool once he'd finished building his box.
Onto the pool.
Yeah, onto the pool, yeah. But it was a stormy evening as well, and so apparently everyone was really worried that we were going to lose power. I didn't know any of this, but... So my dad was at the shed starting up the generator and doing all those little extra tasks. All the logistic stuff, yeah. So I had a really cool birth team, and they all made it, because this birth, it happened really quickly in the end. And so at some point, Lauralee was told that I was in labour, and then she didn't hear from me for an hour or so. So she rang us back, and she was like, okay, I'll head over now. And yeah, of course she arrived, and baby was born not too long afterwards. But interestingly, I was ready to experience all the different parts of labour that I had learnt about and read about and heard about in stories, and it just moved along quite without any sort of definition, and all the medical terminology refers to stages of labour and all of this stuff, but for me, experiencing that was not that. It was just flowing, and I was experiencing some intensity, but I was also feeling pretty amazing. I just remember sitting on the toilet at one point, and I got really fixated on whether the pool was filled and ready to receive me. And they were still madly trying to fill that pool out in the lounge room.
So did you want to get in the pool earlier than you were able to?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, at some point.
But you did say that you went onto the toilet a few times. Was that just to be in a smaller room, or because you felt that was a comfortable position, or? Yeah,
so in podcasts or in birth stories, I had heard about the toilet being the dilation station, and I was like, oh yeah, that's where I'll go hang out. But also I was sort of forced onto the toilet a little bit as well, because my husband at one point was like, the hot water's gonna run out, and you want the pool, don't you? So
did you eat dinner that night?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so your dinner as normal. Paint the picture, because I can see it in my mind, because I have seen photos. You had the pool filled. Mm-hmm. What was your surroundings like? How did you have the room set up and the mask and
Oh yeah, the mask. That was something I was so drawn to in my labour. So I was sitting on this toilet and I'm labouring away. At some point I'd done my own vaginal examination because, midwife in labour, I really did not want to do that. I just, in that moment, decided I wanted to see if the baby's head was there. And I was like, 4 centimetres, and that feels like a bottom. It was not a bottom, it was just membranes, okay. But I was like, okay, I'll have a breech baby. Fine.
We'll roll with that.
Yeah. So, yeah, the mask bit was really cool because I just needed darkness. So I went and I got this mask and I put it on my eyes and I was fully in my bubble internally, just rolling with the movements and the motions and the baby and all the things that were going on in my body, and the mask really helped me to do that. So then once my midwife and my student midwife arrived, I was like, can I get in the pool? And I don't know why I was asking them, but anyway, they were there, and then they helped to support me into the pool. But the space that we had set up was so a birth pool in the centre of the room. I wasn't too fussed on using it in my pregnancy, whether I would birth on land or birth in the water, but as it turned out, that's what I wanted. I had affirmations on my wall that I had been looking at each night during times of being awake in the middle of the night. I had a few fairy lights, I'd lit some candles, incense, I had beautiful music playing, and yeah, it was all the things that I had hoped for. Yeah.
Did you have a mirror in the pool? Were you able to see your boy come out?
So as soon as I just sort of sunk into that embrace of the water, I laid onto my back and it felt so wrong. And so I had to go into more of a forward-leaning position over the edge of the pool, which I had seen that women loved that when they were birthing their babies, and that also felt really great for me. And then I didn't feel as though I needed to see my baby on a mirror. I'd seen so many births and I was visualising in my mind's eye these beautiful births, these babies emerging just gently as I breathed my baby down, and I felt every millimetre of this baby coming down, and it felt great. Like it was what I had been working towards since I stepped out of hospital all those years before. And so it was really exciting, and I guess it was actually at that point that I believed that I was going to birth my baby, or that I was in labour even. Until that point I'd been in denial. So but the thing that really motivated me was placing my hands down in the water and feeling the top of my baby's head coming out. And so I felt that just as the first part of baby's head emerged, and then later on, once the baby's head had been fully born, I put my hand down again and I was able to feel the baby's face. And then instinctively I brought my knee up. I'm in kind of that all fours sort of position, and yeah, as I did that and moved into back onto my back again, baby slipped out, had a cord around the neck. Very, very common, not something I was concerned about, but I know that many people worry about that. It's actually around about 1 in 3 babies are born with a cord around their neck. So Laura Lee just gave me some support to unravel this baby, and then I was able to bring him up onto my chest. And that was the birth. Beautiful. And it was so right for me.
You talk about transition, or you have spoken about transition to me before, around what that could feel like at a time when people tend to get a bit panicky maybe, or start to say, I can't do this.
Yeah.
I want to go home. If you're home, I want to get out of here. Yeah. Did you feel that? Because I know you were preparing to, or you were kind of excited about knowing what that was and feeling that. Did that happen for you?
No.
No transition.
No, I feel as though the transition part was me being like, is the pool ready? That was the extent of it. I was really fixated on this pool being ready. I don't think I vocalized that though. I just was saying to everyone saying to myself, I need to be in the pool.
Yeah,
and that was the transition. But yes, certainly that would be a time where many women will share their thoughts about everybody in the room. Or the situation that they then want to be in, which might be at home or not in that situation.
And as your baby was coming out, Leo, your other son, where was he?
Yep, so he, I guess after I had felt that the baby's head was right there, I asked someone to go and wake Leo. He was asleep, it was midnight, so I think Mum went and got him, and he groggily came out and joined us by the side of the pool and held my hand at one point, and then he was very disappointed when he realised that this baby was not a girl baby. It was a boy baby, and he really wanted a sister.
Oh,
he wouldn't have it any other way now.
No, they'll be best mates when they're older.
Yes, yep. And so that was the birth, and then I stepped out of the pool after a little amount of time. Placenta was born as I stepped out of the pool. This was probably 10 minutes or so after giving birth.
So as you stepped out, you could feel the placenta just fall out, or like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
Mine didn't fall out. How did yours?
Yeah. So, I guess part of that movement, that gravity really was helping the placenta, but there had already been a little separation bleed in the water, and that happens as the placenta detaches from the uterine wall. And so I had seen that, but I wasn't really that focused on any of that because my main focus was my baby and, oh my goodness, I've done it, and catching my breath and all of those things. And so the placenta, although it is such an important part of the birth, I had actually said to whoever, I don't know if it was the midwife, I mean, midwives know about this stuff, but I had said that I didn't want to have to think about the placenta. That was something that would happen, and if after 45 minutes or an hour the placenta was not yet out, then if someone could just remind me, because the whole idea was that by focusing on my baby and having that skin to skin, that would continue to encourage the flow of oxytocin, which is then protective for bleeding and releasing the placenta and all of those sorts of things. That's what you want your body to be doing. So that all just happened, and then at some point when I stood up to step out of the pool, the placenta was there in my vagina, and I just I gave a little push and it went flying onto the floor. Bungeed the cord. Lucky it was a long cord. And, sort of fishing it up.
Of course, because was baby still joined to the placenta?
Yeah. It's always kind of a bit of a funny situation, the placenta bit, and getting out of the pool is always challenging. Actually, the pool is always fun and games, like from start to finish. I have attended births where I've been trying to pump the water out after mum and baby are tucked up in bed, and I've put the pump in, but then the hose attachment has come apart, and then there's water on the ceiling, like birth water. The pool is always fun. Yeah. And usually there's like issues with it being too hot or too cold, or it definitely is a task.
It sounds like such a beautiful story. That experience just magical, and you wrote this one all down. So you have you did it straight away, didn't you? You wrote the story down.
Yes. So I had this most beautiful, amazing shower in my own shower, and then I was tucked up in my own bed, and then we got the cord burning box, and we did the cord burning and released the placenta from baby, and we did all of this like a couple of hours after Bubs was born. The team left at some point. They all went home and had a little sleep themselves, and then it just felt all very simple and easy, and we all went to bed, and that was that. But I was wired. I was just so high on all the hormones and all the good stuff. And so while I was having these beautiful early breastfeeds with my baby, I'm there on my phone writing out my birth story. And so this birth story that I've written in maybe several hours after having given birth is very flourished in the language that I used, because I just was so euphoric, and so when I read this story, I'm like, wow, I was peak creative point in my life.
Kite.
Yeah. And so it's a really nice thing to have, and I wish that I had a story like that for my first birth, but my story was so different at that time, and that's just the interesting thing about all of this, isn't it? And we evolve and change.
Yeah. And like you said, that first birth is still a beautiful gift for you because of mainly you have a beautiful boy from it. What an amazing gift.
Yep.
But also it set you on this amazing pathway to be a supporter of other women going through this process, to allow you to have this next experience with a home birth, and for you to create have this bigger vision and mission now for what you want to be able to do with other women, right? Yeah. What's your hope going forward?
I was really grateful for the seeds that were planted for me in that first pregnancy by this midwife in the antenatal classes, who of course then became my midwife for the second birth. But so I really wanted to be able to share some of that with some other families, and so one of the ways that I've been able to do that is by becoming this positive birth program practitioner and sharing this kind of information with families all across regional WA, and that feels like, what the word is, I feel so grateful and honoured to have that opportunity to be able to be doing that. And the way that happens is, of course, with COVID, there's no face-to-face antenatal education classes happening currently, and so I am able to bring these classes to families via telehealth, which is a Zoom call, and that is really awesome because people are able to access this information regardless of where they are. So suddenly distance doesn't mean that people can't come to the classes, or if partners are working, they can't. Doesn't mean that they miss out on doing the education, and all of that is just so important, because whilst the woman and her baby are at the centre of all of this, it's those support people on the periphery that play such a big role also. And so partners who can gain this understanding of what birth is, and then have the tools to be able to support their people through this rite of passage that we all move through regardless of what the birth itself looks like. It's just so important, and so that's pretty awesome, that side of things. In terms of midwifery, I am very lucky, and I feel so honoured to be part of anybody's birth, and for whatever snippet of time I get to be involved in those stories, I feel lucky to have. And so my goal with that is to be able to support women to make the choices that they want to make, and by giving them information that they need to be able to then make those choices, but then also supporting whatever those choices are along the way. And so I might encounter women during the pregnancy in an antenatal clinic. I might be there with them at the birth, at the hospital, or I might be visiting at home after baby's born and supporting with breastfeeding, that kind of thing as well. So
if any of the listeners want to be able to reach out to you or find you or get information or do one of your courses or anything like that, where would they be able to find you?
Yeah, so since I work for WA Country Health, I I guess in order to access these antenatal classes that we provide as a telehealth service, there is an email address to get that information, so I'll give that to you to put in the show notes. But I think that that's the best way to access information about the classes themselves. It's going to be the most streamlined way. I do have a private Instagram, but I'm not active on it, so people are welcome to message me via Instagram. But I'm not putting a whole lot of content out there in the world, so I might not be the most engaging follow.
Well, if there's any specific questions people want, they can ask me even on my Instagram, and I'll
certainly they can
them in touch with you. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your 2 amazing stories. I have so many questions and so many topics that we can talk about, and I think we will be back with doing another podcast hopefully in the next very near future, because there's lots of topics we can cover.
So much we can talk about, and we haven't even touched on breastfeeding. Oh my gosh, I do need to talk about that just briefly.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Because I've talked about the Positive Birth Program, but I have to say there's also the most amazing additional program to all of that. Actually, there are 2. There's the Positive Cesarean Program, and there is also the 4th trimester breastfeeding and early parenting program that we run as well. And within that program, there are just so many little valuable bits of information, and it's a program that I guess I've put together with information that I really would have wanted to know as a new parent, and we've been receiving some really positive feedback around all of that as well. So that program's still evolving all the time, but it's awesome. So if anyone is interested in accessing that, they could also make contact the same way.
Well, I'll put the names of those courses in the show notes as well, so they can find them, because they sound amazing.
Yes. Cool.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex. It's been a delight.